In this chapter, we will take a look at the media and talk about news and what that term means. We know the First Amendment grants freedom of the press, and the job of the press is to bring the public the news. But what exactly does the term news mean? Well, news is not only what is happening at the moment, but it is also the media's version of reality. News is also an account of obtruding events, particularly those that are timely, which means new or unfolding developments rather than stories that are old. It's dramatic, it's striking developments rather than commonplace ones, and it's compelling. It's developments that are arousing people's emotions. When we talk about press or news media, this is the news and public affairs outlets or how information is spread. We have ABC News, we have CNN, we have Fox, we have Time and Newsweek magazines, we have social media, we have Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. These are all ways that we gather our information. So which outlet do you use to gain your news? And do you ever ask yourself how reliable or biased is that outlet? When we look at politics and what the media is covering, we should always ask if it is biased. We know it is their version of reality, but how reliable is that news source? Do you ever ask yourself how reliable your news source is? Well, surprisingly, most Americans do not. And this is because we kind of form a strange type of trust with that media outlet. And this misconception of trust has been a source of discontent for many politicians and their policies. The country may not always be listening when a politician speaks, but chances are the media is, and they are the ones who relay the information back to the citizens. So in one sense, we're getting secondhand information, and depending on that individual's perception, may be how it is relayed to the public. When we talk about the media, in the news, it has really evolved. The press has been around for a long time. We started out with the partisan press, and Thomas Paine, he would write pamphlets and he would spread them around and discuss political agendas. Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, they had rival partisan press, and this is when a publisher openly backs one party or candidate over another. Hamilton had the Gazette of the United States, and Jefferson had the National Gazette. And these papers were based more on opinion. They were what we would refer to as editorials. They weren't really based on facts or any breaking news. We also have what is known as, and still have, yellow journalism. And yellow journalism is things that were made up. We see that in a lot of different magazines. Take, for example, the National Enquirer. When Hillary Clinton was running, one of the headlines was that she had 6 months to live. Well, now that wasn't true, but it certainly got the public talking. Another story you may find in the National Enquirer is lady gives birth to an alien baby. While these stories are fun to read, we have to be very careful not to take them at face value and always consider the source. We also have what is known as objective journalism, and this clearly is different from yellow journalism. And journalism schools started, and the New York Times was one, and they gave credit to the sources. And this is very different from editorials. With objective, it is just reporting, no sensationalism of the facts. And of course, with objective, you can always find bias, but it is much better than yellow journalism. We evolved into the national news, and from there we headed into the internet. National news was when we would gather it from radio and television, and this became a very common carrier role. And it delivered information directly to the people. So you just turned on your radio or your television set and you didn't have to go out and buy and read a paper. Franklin Roosevelt, as a matter of fact, he used this as a way to promote his New Deal, and it was very effective. It got people talking, it got people excited, and watching the president deliver it, it certainly made a difference. The internet brought us much more ways to reach people. We have blogs, we have social media, numerous ways for individuals to get their news. However, depending on what source you go to, it can be objective or biased, and that's up for you to make that decision. We also know the media is not always forthright with the public, and the media has the power to inject their opinions and influence policies. Additionally, while it's important to always keep the public educated on what is going on in our government, the media does need to be careful not to disclose any information that should remain classified and jeopardize our national security. There have been cases when the media has jeopardized our national security by publicizing classified information, and you can read about that in your chapter. There are a few media issues. First is agenda setting, and this is how the media's way of deciding what is on people's minds. Is their active choosing which issues or topics deserve public attention. And so how do they do this? Well, they cover the same event, problems, issues, and leaders over and over again is the top headline of the morning news, the afternoon news, the evening news, running on Twitter. And they have this policy, most media outlets, and they use the term, if it bleeds, it leads. And this has a very powerful effect on the public because we believe, well, if it's the top story, then this is an issue and something we should be concerned about. We also have priming and framing of issues. They keep pushing a certain headline, and framing is when both sides are presented and the public decides on which side they want to reside. There's muckraking, and this is digging up scandals, digging up corruption. We have the watchdog role, and this roots out scandals, keeps investigating until the truth is found. Some people refer to this as investigative journalism. And we also have what is known as the Friday night dump, and this is when things are put on the news on a Friday, and because nobody's normally paying attention to the news on a Friday evening. You know, it's payday, it's date night, high school games are going on, movies are coming out, so we're normally not home on Friday nights watching the news. So whatever's been dumped on the Friday night news, it rolls through the weekend. When Monday gets here, it's an old issue, something has taken its place, and most of us never even knew that that story was out there. So what about media limitations? Well, we talked about free press, but just as we've talked about with all of our Bill of Rights, free doesn't necessarily mean free. There are limitations to what the media can and cannot do. For example, the airways are regulated by the FCC, and you have to have a license in order to broadcast. And just because they give you a license doesn't mean you can behave in any way that you want on the airways. And the FCC can also take away your license. They have regulations on what words can be said, what body parts can be seen. For example, a nude body at the Super Bowl is not allowed. And we did have the fairness doctrine, which went away, and that meant that a broadcaster or news media had to give equal opportunity to both sides, both politicians, both sides, if the other side wished to come on, but that has also gone away. But we still do have prior restraint, which means there are some things that a journalist just cannot disclose. So, example, if they're covering a war and they happen to be with a military troop, well, they can't give away that location because that would jeopardize national security and the lives of our armed service people. There are other things that the government would like the journalists not to do, but they are allowed to do it. For one thing, there are some things that they can print when it is not a national security risk. So take a look at the Pentagon Papers. And these were papers that were found by a journalist that had to do with the Vietnam War. Well, when the government found out that the New York Times had these papers, they directed them not to publish it. However, the Supreme Court ruled that the Times was within the right to publish the Pentagon Papers because basically the Pentagon Papers were lies that the government was telling the American people about the Vietnam War. So they weren't jeopardizing any national security. They were opening the public's eyes to the lies that were being presented by the government. Slander and libel, well, news media can't just publish anything they want because they can be sued. And while you can make fun of a politician, a congressman or representative, even the president, look at Saturday Night Live. They certainly, throughout the years, have had their fun making fun of politicians. That's allowed, but there is that fine line that you cannot cross because you could be crossing into slander or libel. What about source confidentiality? We've often heard a reporter say, they got the information from a reliable, undisclosed source. Well, Brandenburg versus Hay, 1972, was a Supreme Court case that focused on a reporter's right to maintain their source's confidentiality. In a very divided Supreme Court, the court ruled that there was no reporter privilege or no protection from revealing sources that could be found in the press clause of the First Amendment. So they went on to say the fact that reporters receive information from sources in confidentiality, this does not privilege them to withhold that information if it's during a government investigation. They base this on the fact that an average citizen, you or I, is often forced to disclose information that we may have received in confidence if we are summoned to court to testify, because we could be held, for perjury or in contempt of court if we did not do so. So that's our information on the media. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Thank you.